So
Mm-hmm. 17.
hello, everyone, and welcome to our study session today. The study session we still have not named. We apologize for any errors. It was supposed to start at 11 instead of 10:30 today because I had a 10 o'clock meeting. And then when we came on, a lot of people were confused. So we're going to do part of our section of Purim today, and then we'll finish up Purim next week, which of course is apropos because Purim is actually next week. We'll be celebrating Purim with the spiel on Friday at 5:30. Purim's on Thursday night through Friday. We're going to do it at the end because we thought it would be easier since we already have people coming at 5:30. So we'll do 5:30 Purim spiel and Megillah reading. We got a wonderful spiel already ready. Tony Lembeck is organizing it. We got wonderful skills, got a wonderful Zoom prepared. And then we'll have Steve Gross, who used to be a member of our congregation but moved to be closer to family. He's going to read the Megillah for us. So that'll be next, not this Friday, next Friday at 5:30, and that's going to be on Zoom and YouTube. Today we'll talk a little bit about Purim, and then we'll get into more of it next time because it's really an incredible holiday in terms of all that's been talked about throughout the ages. We know it's, of course, based on the book of the book of Esther. That was a slip there, but they're both female who have books named after them. We know it's a fun holiday. We'll talk a little bit about what the sages thought through the years, how it's evolved. And we'll talk a little bit about the reasons why it's important today still. So first of all, what do we know about Purim? We know it is based on the book of Esther. We know people dress up. We know they do a spiel. We know we read from the Megillah. We have Hamantaschens. We drink alcohol. Those are kind of like the 6 things we know about Purim, and they're all true. But there's a lot of other questions about Purim as to whether it's truth, fiction. It's a very unique book in that, most uniquely, it is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. And so the fact that a book that doesn't mention God got into the Bible is really quite incredible, and they must have had their reasons for selecting it. It's also very different because it's a one-time story. It's a very basic story that goes from beginning to end without any connection, seemingly, to the other books of the Bible. We can make some of them ourselves, but there's no seeming connection. You just read it. It's a standalone book completely. And whereas some standalone books are like Psalms, which is, of course, poetry, or Song of Songs, this is actually a narrative. It's a standalone narrative that is not really connected. You might say, well, Ruth is a standalone narrative. We just talked about it last week or the week before. Ruth is sort of a standalone narrative, but it also is put in the bigger picture, as we see that Boaz is a descendant of Judah and Tamar, and that from the Ruth-Boaz marriage, eventually we'll see King David and the line of David arise. So it is brought into the rest of the world. This is basically the Jews are living here. This is what happens. And so it's very different, very unique, very interesting in that, again, it is a tale of woe that seems to be much more apropos for Jews in the last 1,000 years than it was in the previous 2,000, in that it's about the annihilation of Jews and how we're saved, which is really not a theme that often talked about in Judaism until the last 1,000 years. Certainly we've had moments, but the idea of the joke that we're threatened, we survive, let's eat, that is really the last 1,000 years. And Purim, of course, is a biblical holiday. So there's a lot of debate as to when it was written, as to when it was first celebrated, who wrote it. Of course, it says in the book that Esther wrote the book to make sure in perpetuity people would know this story, but we don't know very much about it. We know the setting is in the 5th century because they believe Ahasuerus might be a reference to one of the kings of Persia, Xerxes to be specific, the second. So what do we learn from this book? Any ideas on what we learn from this book? I'll ask you guys, anything you've learned from the story of Esther that you can remember before we go on? All right, so I will go then. So what are some things? One is this idea of the insecurity of being Jewish in the world. The idea that Jews are living in lands that are controlled by other groups, and that our security, livelihood, even lives are dependent upon the graces of these individuals who are running other countries. So in this case, our lives are dependent on Ahasuerus, and his henchman, his number 2 guy, Haman. And the idea that one individual can come up with an idea because of a slight and take that slight or perceived slight and attempt to annihilate an entire community is a very scary thought. Now, at the end of Purim, of course, we're happy and we'll go over what really happens, but we survive, we thrive, we win. So it's a celebration, but it's also a celebration filled with trepidation. And what's the trepidation? That if one single individual could have this kind of effect on us one time, that means this can be repeated. And certainly the next time we see it repeated, of course, is with the Hanukkah story, and then we see it throughout the last millennia, just the last millennium, not that we see this idea that an individual has power over an entire nation of Jews. And it's a little scary, a little daunting, but it's also a story about the power that Jews can wield if they come together and are clever enough. And that even though the book doesn't mention God, there is a sense of, I don't know if it's luck or happenstance, but more of a sense of things will go our way, and the little things we need to survive and thrive, we will find a way. And in this case, of course, they find a way because fortunately, the king has married someone who is raised Jewish. So it's a warning to always stay vigilant. Now, what's interesting, and I may talk about this in sermons, is that it is still a warning for us, even though in some ways the way we live is very different. Now, we know people say anti-Semitism is on the rise, and that is certainly the case. But there's a huge difference between us now and then, and that is the right to vote. They were not voting for King Ahasuerus. You know, one of the jokes I'm going to tell later is, you know, what would my great-grandparents have thought if a guy comes to their shtetl, gathers everybody in the shtetl and says, all right, everyone, here's the list of people who want to be czar. You guys vote. Everybody gets one vote in the whole kingdom, and you help choose who the czar is going to be. I mean, can you imagine our great-grandparents being given the option to vote for their leadership, and not even on a community level, but on a national level? Is really, I don't even know if they could have thought of that as possible. And yet that's what we have here. So this is what we are looking at in this story. Now, let's go over the story a little bit and talk a little bit about the story and what we don't know about the story, because we tend to end it early. So the story, of course, is in basic fashions, they're living in this country, empire, really. The king is frustrated with his wife because she won't dance in front of him and his drunken buddies. Whether he wanted her to dance naked or not, we don't know. It's hard to tell. Anyway, she leaves him, or he fires her, most likely kills her. Who knows? He's having a year-long celebration. He's partying every night, so he holds a contest to find his next wife. And of course, it's a year-long preparation, and he chooses Esther, who's the niece or the cousin of a guy named Mordecai. Mordecai just happens to be the man who saved the king when he hears of a plot to kill the king. And so the king brings his chief henchman Haman and says, I want to reward somebody who's been dedicated. How should I reward him? And Haman assumes he's going to be rewarded himself, gives the king these wonderful ideas. Walk me on your horse in a parade. And the king says, great, I want you to do that now for Mordecai, who just happens to be a bitter enemy, because Mordecai is the man who refuses to bow down to Haman. When Haman tells everybody, bow down to me, I'm the grand vizier of this land, Mordecai says no. So even as he is honoring Mordecai with the celebratory parade that he promised that the king he would do, he's now setting up all the Jews to be annihilated by telling the king there are these insidious people and they want to kill you. I want you to send a writ that we can kill them. And so Ahasuerus falls for it. The writ is sent out. But of course, his wife intervenes when Mordecai goes to her and says, you need to save our people. So she, of course, she interrupts the king, which again is punished by death. Shows you what kind of king this is. If your own queen knocks on the door to interrupt you, and she can be killed for it. Anyway, he accepts from her an invitation to party. Haman goes. She's having a great time. She says, you know what, I'm going to invite you to another party. And in that next party, she tells the king that somebody's trying to kill her, and it's Haman. And so, of course, Haman is hung on the gallows that he had set up for the Jews. But that is not the end of the story. The end of the story is actually there apparently is some rule or law long-standing that once something has been enacted by the king, it can't be stopped. And so on this certain day, all the Jews, it's going to be open season on the Jews. So instead, he gives another writ that says the Jews can defend themselves. And so on that day, the Jews kill a lot of people. The Jews then request an additional day to go on the rampage and kill more people, which are given to them. And so that is what happens, that the Jews end up killing more people. That's why we have Purim, and then you can have another day of Purim for walled cities. We'll talk about that next week. So it's a violent book as well, but again, that is not an exception because there's a lot of violence in some other aspects. But it's very interesting to see the Jews are empowered, and they kind of go overboard a little bit on the retribution. And it shows that even Jews can take a good thing in the wrong direction. So it's a really strange book to be in the Bible for all of these reasons. We are ordered to read the Megillah on Purim. Now it says it's supposed to read the Megillah on the day of Purim. The day of Purim could be the day or the night. So some say you read it the night, some say in the morning. Usually most say would begin in the night and read the Mishnah or the Talmud on the Megillah, the section in the morning. That is one of the rules that we, of course, do. So we'll take out our Megillah. There's also the idea of sending gifts to people. That has become one of the traditions that you send Moshlach Manot, which is sending of gifts to people on Purim. You're supposed to send at least 2 portions to one person, or maybe gifts to 2 people. That's kind of the rule. So a lot of people get care packages with Hamantaschens and a grogger and such forth. Obviously, the getting intoxicated, so intoxicated that you can't tell the difference between Haman and Mordecai, has become a big issue in the modern world, because obviously intoxication has become a very big problem in our world, binge drinking. And not only that, drinking and driving, because that has become an even bigger issue. So can you keep Purim without fulfilling, like for those of us who don't drink, how do you keep Purim if one of the laws is you're supposed to get drunk? And so that's always been a debate and continues to be so. And what if you're an alcoholic? Again, that is a big issue. As for Haman, who is this Haman character? He is said to be a descendant of Amalek, who is basically the bad guy who attacks the Israelites right after they cross the Red Sea. But throughout history, at least in the Bible, Amalek really represents the bad guy. Amalek is the evil person. That's why when the Amalekites are defeated and destroyed, they keep seemingly mysteriously come back. So Amalek has become the harbinger of death for Jews, you would say, and that is who Haman is descended from, or the Grand Inquisitor, or Hitler, or anybody else who, or Antiochus, anyone who tries to destroy the Jews is basically said to be from the line of Amalek. And so it's not meant to necessarily be taken literally, but it is. Probably the strangest aspect of this holiday, though, is the way it takes us from the dreariness of almost certain death to the giddiness of a party. Because we're reading this book where the Jews were about to be killed by this terrible henchman who has pulled the wool over this king's eyes. And then all of a sudden at the end, the Jews win, and we're supposed to do what during this holiday? Party. That's what we're supposed to do. So party as we hang somebody and kill his children and kill all these people who threatened us. And this becomes the big party holiday. Not only that, unlike Hanukkah, Purim is in the Bible. Hanukkah, it's not in the Torah, so it's not considered a major holiday, but it is in the Bible. So it's not only that, there is a tractate in the Talmud just for Purim called the Megillat. So it's a lot of debate as to, is it an important holiday? Is it not an important holiday? It's happy, it's sad. It's not in the Torah, but it's in the Bible. You know, so there's all these interesting debates over it. Now, we read it on the scroll as well, which makes it seem important because you're reading it on a scroll like you read the Torah. There are 5 books in the Bible that can be put on a scroll that are not included in the Torah, and each one is kind of assigned to a holiday. But the one that we really talk about most is this book. This book is the only book that pretty much all congregations read from a scroll beside the Torah, and so that really gives it some kudos and makes it even more important. Not only that, it becomes a silly holiday, and we'll talk about some of the transitions next month, but it has become a very silly holiday. Of course, Hanukkah has probably taken over as the most popular fun holiday, but traditionally this is it. It's a silly holiday. You read the Megillat Esther while you're drunk making weird voices. You dress up in costumes and get drunk. You make fun of Haman, who is a terrible person. And so you're even allowed to do something that the Torah specifically says you're not allowed to do. And what is that? You're allowed to dress as a woman if you're a man, which is specifically said in the Torah you're not supposed to. But the Talmud says you can do it for this holiday only, which is, you know, big change. So any questions so far?
The other 4 Megillas, what are they?
They are Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations. What's the 5th one? Ruth, Esther, Song of Songs, Lamentations. I'm missing one. Let me get, sorry, I should know this. We're going to stop take because I forgot one of them. Let's see here. They are Ecclesiastes, sorry.
And they're all read on scrolls as well?
They can be traditionally, yeah. But really, the Purim, Book of Esther is the one that is generally still done in all holidays. I mean, every year.
Does Ahasuerus know that Mordecai is Jewish?
He does not. We don't think so. Although, how could he not? You got to remember, this king, it does not seem to be the brightest bulb on the branch. He could be considered a moron, but the story is a farce. It has never really been taken to be literally a story that actually happened. Again, there's going to be radical groups that think so, but it is not. It is a story with meaning, and it takes issues to the nth degree to make sure we know how ridiculous. He is having a party for a year straight. That means it's like the city of Savannah's government shutting down for a year and saying, we'll see you in a year. Fend for yourself. He has a year pageant, a pageant that lasts over a year just to find his wife. A minister comes to him and says, I think you need to kill all these people because they're bad. And so he says, okay, kill all of them without a second thought. So it has to be a moral to it that we have to find. And so, I mean, obviously you give charity, which is one of the major points of it, but there's got to be other points to it, why it was chosen to be in, or why was it written in the first place. It's obviously some sort of allegory of a survival of the Jewish people. We know it probably took some of its traditions from other groups. There was a Persian mass festival. There was a Persian feast of the dead. There was a Greek holiday that it may have taken things from, and that you're supposed to get drunk. You know, so it's kind of similar that you're celebrating while you're burning the bad guy in effigy. I mean, it's that kind of holiday, and it's for kids as well as adults. So it's a kids' holiday in which we hang the bad guy, and all the Jews go and need an extra day to kill people. So
When did it take on the character of being the silliness, though, of adding the the drunkenness aspects and the costuming and those things to it?
That is a very good question. Now, when we think of the Purim Spiel, that is a little later, maybe 1,000 years ago, but the getting drunk is a Talmudic edict. So, and I think it's in the Mishnah. So we're talking by the year 200 CE, it's already got that kind of atmosphere about getting drunk to it. And then it only changes as these Jews scholars move into these academies in Babylon, and it becomes the holiday where basically on this holiday, one of the students is chosen to be the chief rabbi. But his job is to basically make fun of everybody. And that's what it became. It became these seminary students dressing up in costumes, cross-dressing, one guy standing up and being the fake chief rabbi who's making fun of everybody. And then as years go on there, you've got the spiel. I mean, I think there's early on, there was an understanding that this had to be a different type of holiday. It couldn't be so depressing. It wasn't a major holiday. Obviously, or most likely, it was well known at the time that the books were being chosen for the Bible. Now, we all think that the rabbis or the priests chose everything and did everything. That is not necessarily true. They may have the final cut, but they have to be very careful. If Purim is a super popular holiday and they don't include it in the Bible, and people just say, well, we're going to do it ourselves anyway and include it in our Bible, they're going to lose people and they're going to lose control of the religion. They need to work with the people. And obviously, this was well known enough that it had to be put into the Bible. And if it wasn't, then people might have been questioning, why are you not putting in one of these most important and everybody's favorite book? Same thing with Hanukkah. Hanukkah was a holiday the rabbis tried to get rid of, and they were unsuccessful. It was just too popular with people during a certain generation or two, and so they couldn't get rid of it. They kept putting it down, so it wasn't a big holiday until modern era, but they were never able to squash it completely.
Was the lesson that you had mentioned about, eternal vigilance, did this get codified at a time when the Jews were, we're always been in a, let's say, in a dangerous situation, always been a minority, and you mentioned, of course, Hanukkah, and we mentioned, of course, we know the Holocaust, but was this codified then at a time when people were saying, hey, remember this, kind of thing, as far as we're always strangers in another person's land, it seems.
Well, if you go by the date when it was supposed to be written, no. They were living in a Persian era, which they were doing very well. The 5th century was a good era generally for Jews in Judea. They were self-ruling, although they were under the Persian rule, but the Persians kind of gave them autonomy as long as they paid their taxes and didn't revolt. So it was a much better era than the previous century when they were captured and sent into Babylon. But this idea became much more part of Judaism probably after the destruction of the Second Temple, after the story of Hanukkah, this idea that bad things happen and we have to overcome them. So by the time they're choosing the books for the Bible, that may be one of the reasons, because it was a probably very well-known story of a group of people overcoming, and very importantly, it's one of the few books that is not based in Israel at all. There's no reference. In the Genesis, they're going in and out. In Exodus, they leave Egypt and want to go to Israel. This is entirely in another country where people are thriving, and they have chosen not to leave. It could be another thing about you should move to Israel. It's hard to know. But this is a diaspora book about a group living outside the land who are not planning to go back. They want to live their lives. So obviously, after the destruction of the Second Temple, where Jews were kind of moving to other places, and after Jews pretty much started leaving Israel in bulk in the 3rd century CE, it might have been a very good book for people who are living outside of Israel. We're minorities, but we still can be clever and save ourselves, type thing. That is certainly a possibility. Any other questions so far?
Rabbi?
Yes.
2 quick questions. One, excuse me, what does Megillah mean?
Megillah means just the writing. It's the whole thing. That's all it is, the scripture.
We use in Yiddish, that's the whole Megillah. So
Yeah.
No, okay. Second of all, was this one of the first times that a woman had such, what should I say, accolades of what was accomplished through her?
It is a rare thing, but yes. Yeah, so during this Megillah, which is, the story, we see that a woman takes center stage, but we know in other places they have 2. We've seen Ruth, we've seen Deborah. We've seen the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. But really, there are few times where a woman is the center of the story. Here she sort of is. She shares it with Mordecai and Haman.
Oh, good.
Whereas in the book of Ruth, it is much more centered on Ruth and Naomi. So Esther is certainly the hero, but she is not the only one, and the book is not centered on her at all. It's centered on several and probably 4 individuals. So it's definitely not probably as woman-centric as Ruth, but it also shows that someone who seemingly would not be able to save the Jews was able to save the Jews with her cunning.
Thank you.
Ron and Arlene, good to see you. All right, so what are the things about Purim? Well, there is a lot of connection that people make between Purim and modern eras, usually with some sort of fanaticism. That we see Haman has become a fanatic. He has gone way to the one side of, he's making people bow to him under penalty of death. So he has become what they would call a fanatic. And it's one of those stories in which we deal with fanaticism, we deal with anti-Semitism, and we deal with self-sacrifice, as Esther's willing to, give up her life to save the Jews. It's one we talk about psychological warfare and how the cleverness of Esther. Esther doesn't just go up to her husband and say, Haman wants to kill the Jews are innocent. No, she invites him to a party. She invites him to another party. She's schmoozing him. She's probably batting her eyes. She is doing anything she can that she thinks will convince him. She's either being shy or aggressive, depending on what she believes is the best way to do this. Not only that, she has to move him away from his guy pal Haman, who apparently he holds in great esteem. And we all know, people who have been less than good human beings, but who have access to leaders who have been their pals, and what kind of terrible things they can do. And so she's got to use her sechel, her wisdom, to figure out a way to combat this. And it's really interesting to see. Plus, you see that she is, and this is a word I was looking at when I was doing some of the studying for this, infiltrated the higher ups, which is something that is going to be important for Jews throughout history, is to, even if you're in a nation that is not your own, to be able to work your way up into a position of power. Think about all the Jews who did so well during the times of the golden age of Spain, or the ones who did well in Babylon. America's a little different because, the society itself is a little bit more free and open to it. But it's really an incredible story of how she, I wouldn't say manipulates, but kind of curtails Haman's manipulation. Any questions? Any other questions? I'm answering all of them again. I'm like, all right.
Is there any historical evidence that she existed? Is there, because the
None.
Persian Empire is replete with, monuments and steles and whatever they call it. And, we know about Ahasuerus was a real character, right? He was a real
They
character.
believe he was, I believe, Xerxes II.
Yeah.
And, they do this from the tendency of Xerxes to have parties and from these other things. But there's I don't think, they haven't been able to corroborate that this was in any way connected to another book. It's almost entirely on its own there, which is not unprecedented, but usually the books try to connect each other.
Were the Jews actually a large part in Persia at the time?
Oh yeah, that is definitely true. So they're using something in truth. During the, after the first temple was destroyed, a large group of Jews were taken to Babylon, which was taken over by Persia in 536. And the Persian government, basically the Persian king, said, Jews, if you want to go back to your homeland, you can go back there. Go back. We'll pay for your travel costs. We'll pay for you to fix the temple so you can have your sacrifices. It was a way of investing in the future of the Persian Empire. We're going to invest in you going back to your land, getting things running, and then you're going to pay us taxes and make sure that area stays dedicated. And that's how the Persians did it. But a lot of Jews did not want to go to Persia. First of all, they weren't born in Israel. Most of the Persian Jews, that generation, were born in Persia or Babylon. They're thriving. They're probably doing pretty well. Why am I going to go to this backwards country where my my grandparents lived? It's like me saying I want to go back to Romania, but I've always been in America. I'm successful here. If I go move to Poland, I'm not going to speak the language. I'm not going to have skills. So the people who went back were probably the people who weren't doing as well, or the adventurers, or maybe some of the religious religiously dedicated people. Think about the people who came to Savannah. We all know the boat came here in 1733. Did that boat have people who were doing really well in Europe and thriving and successful? No, it was smart people who just hadn't found their place, and they were trying to start a new life and do well. So the elite probably stayed, excuse me, in Babylon. Any other questions? All right, doing good. Now, so for the Passover celebration itself, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to read the book from the beginning to end with prayers before and afterwards and a couple prayers. Some places do that, some places don't. You can create a spiel, which is based on, for a long time, people probably dressed as the characters in the story. But of course, today, people don't necessarily just dress that way. We dress in a wide range of characters. Any other thoughts on that? Anybody have any Purim stories that they remembered that they enjoyed? All right, so for the last thing we're going to do is this text, which is from the Talmud, which I think we studied several years ago. And we're going to look at this to see how even math is involved in Purim. Because remember, Purim is celebrated in walled cities on a different day. That's the next day. But there's all these rules about when you celebrate Purim, because remember, throughout the ages, sometimes people lived in small villages, and they would, and they'd come into the big cities to do stuff, and that's when they want to celebrate. So let's look at this. Everybody see this? You see this little graph? Okay, there's the graph. So as you can see, Purim can be celebrated on any day but Saturday. You see how it's being celebrated? In villages, towns, and walled cities. There's 3 places it can be celebrated. Villages, towns, walled cities. So let's see how they determine where. And this is from the Mishnah. The Megillah is read on the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, and 15th. So they're basically saying the Megillah can be read on the 11th of the month, the 12th of the month, the 13th of the month, the 14th of the month, and the 15th of the month, which is weird because you're only supposed to read it once, but it says you can read it on all 5 days. What does that mean? Cities which have been walled since the days of Joshua read the Megillah on the 15th. So if you're in a city that is walled, you read it on the 15th. Villages and big cities read it on the 14th. However, villages may push forward the day of meeting to Monday. What does that mean? It means that in these societies, when did they read Torah? Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. Monday and Thursday were market days. So people went into the bigger cities, the people from the villages went into towns. So if the 14th of Adar fell on a Monday, why would then the people who are from the villages would be in the towns and they would celebrate it that day? So if you're living in Buford, you would come on Monday to Savannah anyway because it was a market day, and we'd celebrate Purim because Purim is on the 14th. But walled cities celebrate it the next day. So if you live in Jerusalem, you would celebrate it on Tuesday, on the 15th. Does everybody get that? Now, let's say the 14th was on a Tuesday or Wednesday. If it's on the 14th, the towns always celebrated on the actual day. They would celebrate it on the 14th. Villages have to go to the closest Monday or Thursday. So villages would go to the Monday. And the walled city always do it on the day afterwards. So if Purim fell on a Tuesday, if you lived in a town, you'd celebrate on Tuesday. If you lived in a walled city, you'd celebrate on Wednesday. If you lived on a village, you'd have to go into town and you'd do it on a Monday. Same thing for Wednesday. You guys understanding this, or is it getting confusing? If you live in a village, basically you have to do it on a Monday or Thursday. So you just go back. So if Purim is on a Tuesday, you celebrate it on a Monday in town.
Rabbi,
Ron,
what day do you celebrate when you live in Sun City?
is Sun City, it would depend. Is Sun City considered a village, a town, or a walled city?
Well, it's, go ahead, Gary. Larry.
If you say the number, you have to decide what a number is for a town. If a town is, say, 50,000 people, are there 50,000 people in Sun City?
No.
Probably about 16,000.
Okay,
17,
so
yeah.
it would be considered a village. But if the rule was you need to have 15,000 people to be a town, then Sun City would be a town. It would just depend how you define it. So let's say Purim is on a Thursday. So the towns always celebrate on the day. The walled cities always celebrate on the next day. And the villages celebrate it on a Monday or Thursday. So if it's on a Thursday, the villages and towns celebrate together, and the walled city celebrates it on a Friday. So but what happens if Purim is on a Saturday? It can't be on a Saturday because you can't do stuff. So if you are a village or town, you have to move it to Thursday because the next day has to be Purim for walled cities. So
Why wouldn't they?
I'm sorry, the walled cities would do it on Sunday. So if Purim's on a Saturday, the towns and villages
Do it on Thursday.
would move it back to Thursday, and the walled city would have it on Sunday.
So the basic reason for all of this confusion, let's say of towns, villages, or different days, is to accommodate the market days or the court days that were set up for each of the
Exactly.
towns. So it's not to
Exactly.
interfere, so that they gave preference really to the existing tradition of the holiday of whatever was taking place there, and people could still go about their normal business.
Exactly.
Okay.
I don't understand that.
All right. So you can see why it's very complicated, but it's fun.
But now it's standardized, or is it among the three major denominations of Judaism? Or-
Yeah, it is standardized now. So you still don't do it on Shabbat. And all of these things would be if you are a village. We would consider ourselves a town. So we celebrate it on the actual day of Purim. If you're living in Jerusalem, they will celebrate it on the next day. If you're living in Jaffa, you celebrate it in the next day. There are not that many walled cities that are still left from that time period. So that's a little bit about Purim. We'll do a little bit more next week. And as we know, I mentioned not this Friday, but next Friday, we're going to do the Purim Spiel at 5:30. We're going to do the reading a day late, just because to make sure we can do it all together. And it'll be kind of pre-Shabbat thing, which is kind of against the rules, but with Zoom going on, we're gonna do the best we can. Ron,
Is there any plans or talk about when they can open up CMI? Most
Yes.
of us probably got at least the first shot and
Right.
scheduled for the second shot already.
we are looking at probably
Oh,
April.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
We will set up, we're looking at probably starting, this is not confirmed, probably start on a Friday night just to test it. And the numbers we're working on, but we have a general idea. It's going to be something like 30 or 50, somewhere in there will be allowed. And for Saturdays, we'll probably have some sort of sign up where you sign up. And if you can't get it, I don't know if we haven't decided if it's going to be, we have a committee doing it. Is it going to be by last name alphabetically? Is it going to be so? But it'll be probably that if you can't go 1 week, you'll go the next. So it'll be like, and Friday night, which is a little easier because the numbers were not usually over 50. We're going to test it. So almost as surely right now, it looks like April. So after Passover.
They're still going to try and restrict tourists?
No tourists are going to be allowed to come to services, but we're going to be opening probably the museum around the same time for scheduled tours with docents who want to do it.
You know, at least people as they allow in should already have had their second shot already.
That we haven't figured out yet. We haven't decided on that yet because if you do that, that means children can't come. So we're going to work on that because children can't have
Well,
shots.
up to a certain age
Yeah, right.
anyway.
So that is the debate. Do people have to have shots? Do we have to have them? Problem with saying that is, how do we get proof that they've been given the shots?
They show you the card.
I guess so. That guy. So that is definitely on the table. That's the one thing that hasn't been. That's one of the things that hasn't been decided. Pretty much, it's going to be members only. Certainly until we can have bigger crowds. And there'll be exceptions, obviously, if you have family coming in, and if you're connected with a member, that'll be fine.
You'll still
Probably.
have the Zoom service, I imagine,
The
simultaneously?
Zoom, it will have for
YouTube.
YouTube. It'll be YouTube for
YouTube.
both.
Oh, YouTube only, okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, once we do the dual thing, I'm not sure. That's because that's the technology we haven't set yet. We haven't figured out because the technology makes it a little harder because what we do for Zoom won't necessarily work for live service in the sanctuary because, for instance, Saturday morning, all the music's recorded. But if we're doing a live service, is the singing in the sanctuary going to be able to be heard by you guys on the video, and how it's going to be working best? So that's what we have to figure out. Because like right now on Zoom, it sounds fine, but if you're in this big room with lots of people Zooming, are you going to be able to hear if you're not there in person? The organ is one of the bigger questions. Like, do we want to do a Saturday morning live service with an organ? But if you're watching on screen and you can't hear the organ, it's not going to work. So that's the technological stuff, but we'll have that sorted out by April.
I imagine they're not going to continue though with lunch and kiddush or that kind of thing.
We're not doing lunch to start, right? That may come later. There's an idea of possibly having like to-go lunches afterwards. That's definitely on the table.
On the go, take out.
Or to-go dinner as well, but we're already doing to-go dinners. We don't know if we're going to keep doing that also. We're waiting to see. So pretty much Passover, as of now, it's not definitive, but that's most likely that's what's going to happen.
Well,
And
as far as Passover, perhaps that you can have a certain amount of people come Friday night and then another group come on Saturday.
you mean for Seder?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Seder we're definitely not going to do live because it's just too hard. I mean, we have like 320 people who come. And a lot of them are not members, but a lot of them are, and members bring their family. So if we did 2 services, that's still 100 people probably at each service.
Yeah.
That's just too, so we're not going to do anything that big. And if we did a smaller one, how are you going to choose the 20 people who are invited to be in the sanctuary from the congregation? So We'd love to do it. What we're doing for Passover is I'm going to do a live Seder from my house. And then the night before, we're doing a live from my house family Seder for kids and their families. Anybody can join. We haven't figured out, we're hoping to do them Zoom so that people can participate. But again, the technology we're still working on. Last year I did on Zoom myself. This year we're going to do the Seder professionally filmed. So it'll look better, but we have to figure out how we're going to do the participation thing.
So if you say after the Saturday service, for instance, of course, if you had some, just so people can see people.
Yeah.
But you have to wear masks also, even if you had the shots. You know, perhaps we can do it that way. Just have some wine and something so people can say, oh, you're still here, you know?
Yeah, and I think, well, masks are going to be required at services no matter what. The best option would be doing stuff outside afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like if we went into the Monterey Square
that's good.
or have a drive-in service again. So those are options. We're not going to be letting people in the social hall yet because it's an enclosed space. But that will probably change in the coming afterwards and as time goes on. I mean, the idea is to get back to the way we were eventually, but we're going to do it step by step. And by April, probably most or a high percentage of the people 65 and over and first responders will have be inoculated. But
See, what I'm noticing also is that the longer we go on Zoom, people are not smiling as much anymore. You know?
well, we're going to leave Zoom. We're going to still do Zoom and still do YouTube for people who want to watch services from bed. But yeah, we definitely want to go back in. Although I've enjoyed having Saturday mornings off. It's nice. Never had Saturday mornings off before.
Yeah.
It's nice to play with the kids, but you know, that is something we're all looking forward to getting back to. So it's not for sure yet, but pretty much that's, unless something happens, it'll probably be April.
Yeah, then I can see Larry's smiling face again.
Oh, that's the main, I mean, Larry is going to be the exception. He's going to be invited to every service because he'll bring in the people. So if people know Larry's there, they will come.
They're having a cardboard cutout of me, you know, like at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's what they're going to do.
And I'll
You
be-
see at the Super Bowl.
That's a great idea. We should
Of
all,
course
everybody do that. Anybody who sends a cardboard cutout to me, we'll put it in the
But
service.
what was it, $100? You can have a cardboard cutout at the Super Bowl?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that is really funny. I'm going to put that
I
down.
suggested that to Jennifer, actually.
Did you?
know,
That's a great
Yeah.
idea.
sponsor a seat for, you know, so that with the, what do you call it? The seating, you know, where you're seating apart and things like that, social distance seating or whatever you want to call it, that you can
Well, I
still
think
sit
that's
next to
such a great
somebody.
idea.
You could even put the, you know, a famous rabbi next to you or something. To, you know, and have his picture or, you know, or a superhero or a Star Trek person.
I'm thinking, and if anybody wants to sponsor and get every single person on the Sgt. Pepper's album in there, that will give them a good deal. Like it's $100 per individual and it's $1,000 for 20 individuals. How's that?
Well, how about Star Trek characters?
For Star Trek characters, it's free of charge. Any science fiction, if you want. But yeah, so I can't give you a definitive date. So, but Purim is in February this year. So, I mean, sorry, March this year. And it is, I mean, Passover, sorry. Purim is in February, Passover is in March, and Passover finishes on, so the earliest we're looking is the 10th of April. So probably be the 10th, it'd probably be, I imagine the 17th or 24th would probably be the two best depending on spring break. So looking forward to seeing all of you in person after we've all been inoculated a second time.
Sheila, be well. Jeff and Flossie, be
Yeah,
well.
thank you. You
Everybody
too.
stay
Good to-
well and
Good
hopefully.
to see you, Arlene.
Next
Okay,
week,
nice
we'll
to see you.
continue
Good
to
to see
talk about
you.
Purim.
Bye-bye.
Everybody is required to be wearing a funny costume next week. It's
Ah.
funny. But remember, the Purim Spiel is going to be 5:30 a week from Friday. We'd love to have people come and join us. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll do the spiel and we'll do the reading, and then there'll be a service for anybody who wants to stay for a service afterwards.
Bye-bye.
All right, stay safe, everybody.
everyone.
See some of you
Everybody.
later today.
Hello,
Don't
Jane.
forget,
Bye, fine.
3 o'clock today. Bye, guys.
Oh, yeah, 3 today.
3 o'clock.